Good morning. The time is 10 o'clock. Today is Monday, April the 23rd, and we will call this meeting of the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board to order. The first item on our agenda is the pledges of allegiance. If you'll join me with the pledge to the United States flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Sorry, Doug, I kind of got in your space. Our next item on the agenda is a roll call.
Chair Jamie Wycliffe.
Present.
Jim Jeffries.
Present.
Lester Renfro.
Present.
Clayton Black. Chance Bolton.
Present.
Tony Pena.
Present.
Martha Gail Reed Lynch.
Here.
Alex Sostre.
Present.
And Joyce Yanuzi.
Present.
Mr. Black has communicated our schedule changed and necessitated a meeting date change, which caused a conflict for Mr. Black's schedule. I would recommend a motion to excuse his absence.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jeffries?
move that the absence of Mr. Black for the April 23rd, 2018 board meeting is hereby excused.
I'll second.
A motion from Mr. Jeffries, a second from Mr. Renfro. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We will move to agenda item number 3, a reoccurring item on our agenda, governor appointments to the AMC Advisory Committee.
Madam Chair, due to the, nothing to report at this time, except that the gentleman that we've been working with at the Governor's Appointments Office no longer works at the Governor's Appointments Office, and we have yet to be assigned a replacement, or at least not communicated who that replacement will be. As soon as we know that, we will be back. Get back with them and solicit their timely work towards future appointments.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the opportunity for the public to make any comments they would like to make before the board. The board will not be able to take action on your items, but we certainly can hear your comments. Is there anyone that would like to speak? Seeing no movement, have we received any requests for public comment? And having none, we will move. I am going to ask the board to move some items around on our agenda today. So if you will please turn to 32 and 33. We're going to address some audits. We have some guests in the audience that we'd like to accommodate efficiency since we have such a long agenda today. So agenda item number 32 is discussion regarding annual internal audit report.
Good morning, Facilities Director, Staff and Support Services. I'd like to introduce our internal auditor, Ms. Darlene Brown, with Ms. Hummel Jones.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning.
This is my first time in front of you, so thank you for your support in our firm. I'm Darlene Brown. I work with McConnell & Jones. Is this on?
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm a director with the firm, and we are providing you internal audit services. And this year, we conducted an audit of the human resources compensation function. Thank you. And I'd like to turn your attention to page 317 in your packet. That's where the report actually begins. And to speed up the process of you have a long agenda here, so I'm going to just hit the summary, which starts on page 321. So when we looked at the human resources function, it was part of our risk assessment, but also part of the executive director's requests, because the agency understood that there were some potential problems in the human resources area with the concerns of pay, the compensation, and the recruiting and retention processes. So those are the processes we focused on. And the agency has already taken many actions to address these and be on the path to being the employer of choice. By that, it means that offering high compensation as much as possible within the constraints of being a state agency and the budget set that are also applied. Although TREC does not have to follow the compensation structure, just is more in line that way with everybody else, and that's who their primary competitors are. So we believe that everything that's been put into place is going to help the agency achieve that objective of becoming the employer of choice for the state of Texas. Some of the things that they've done under the compensation administration policies and procedures, they've made them more transparent and clearer on how compensation is going to be addressed. And my understanding is our recommendation was to formalize these procedures now through the employee handbook and written documentation. That has already been completed. Our second one was looking at the compensation structure. And in some areas, the agency had fallen behind in the salaries. They've adjusted those salaries now. They did a market study, compared themselves to other state agencies and SDSIs in the area. Our recommendation on that is continue to do the studies, but also develop your compensation structure around your available budget and the skills required for the agency, rather than just only going by the SIAO's guidelines on compensation. And then also in the benchmarking, let's go ahead and start including some of the public and private organizations, because that's who you may be competing for some of your highly skilled jobs. Our third one was under the area of merit increases. That the merit increase was not quite so transparent to employees, and so it was kind of competing a little confusion, a little frustration. That's now become more transparent through clearer policies. We've also recommended a tiered approach to merit increases, where there's a pool of funds available based on the performance of based on your budget, and then you allocate a portion of that to performance of the individual divisions and departments, and then from there you allocate theirs according to performance appraisals, and that's underway right now. Under talent acquisition, your agency has some positions that are highly competitive, so we're recommending a two-tiered approach to that. You always have a pipeline of potential individuals that are interested in working for TREC. And so by doing that, what you'll have individuals internally or externally that are working with other sources, such as professional associations, to identify these individuals that may be interested in working with TREC, developing that relationship, and then when you have a posting or an opportunity available, you already have individuals identified, and it makes that quicker. And then under leadership training, there has been a lot of leadership training provided. We're saying now that's a really good thing. Now let's follow up with that and survey and see if that training that's been provided is actually having a positive impact across the organization. So all of those actions and our recommendations have already been implemented. And although we just closed this recently, so that tells you how important the agency considers their human resources and their talent. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
No, thank you for the
Okay,
report.
thank you.
Agenda item number 33 is discussion regarding the Texas Workforce Commission audit report.
So on page 337 in your materials, You will note, well, I'm sorry, the item number 33 is the Texas Workforce Commission's compliance audit, which is done every 6 years, and it's a federally required audit to ensure that the agency is in compliance with the Equal Opportunity Employment Act. You will remember that at the last meeting, I did mention to you that we were undergoing this. Now we have the final audit in front of you. And I will bring your attention to page 348. And this is the only area which we didn't, all other areas were in compliance, but there was one under best practices where we were not. We have since come in compliance, and that was simply to affirmatively state that confidentiality will be maintained. Even though it was already our practice, we had to put that in writing and put that into our employee handbook. And that is confidentiality under sexual harassment cases. So although it was already our policy, we are our practice, we needed to put that into the handbook, which we have updated since then. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Doesn't appear there are any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move back to our consent agenda, which is agenda item number 5, the ratification of the official record of the February the 9th board meeting, and agenda item number 6, which are the approval of the agreed final orders. A complaint number 18006, complaint number 17326, and complaint number 17070. Is there any item that you would like removed from the consent agenda for discussion? Hearing none, is there an approval for the consent agenda? Or an action for the consent agenda, I suppose.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Pena.
I move that the board ratify and approve all items on the consent agenda as presented.
I second.
A motion from Mr. Pena, a second from Mr. Bolton. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. It appears I know we've just started in our meeting, but it's probably the most appropriate time for us to take up executive session. We have a number of items that we need to address, so I will move your agenda item number 8 ahead of your agenda item number 7, and we will take up item number 7 upon our return. So the time is 10:15. The board will now go into executive session to obtain the advice of legal counsel or discuss pending or contemplated litigation, including settlement offers and enforcement actions pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.071 and personnel matters pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.074. We anticipate returning to open session in approximately 60 minutes. Board, it's 11:45, and we are reconvening from our executive session back into open session for the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board. We were to agenda item number 7, which is a contested case for our organization. It is the discussion and possible action on the proposal for decision from the State Office of Administrative Hearings in the matter of SOA Docket 329-18-0197 ALC. Elazar Fuentes.
Madam Chair and board members, good morning. Kristen Warman, your general counsel. Before you today is the proposal for decision that is being presented by the administrative law judge. Respondent is represented by counsel, who informed us that he would not be attending the board meeting, and we don't have anybody in the audience that I am aware of who is here on this matter.
Is there anyone representing this individual present today? Or the individual with whom the complaint is filed? Seeing none, I agree with you, Ms. Warman.
The recommendation from the administrative law judge is that the board revoke respondent's license and impose an administrative penalty of $10,000. Staff is here to answer any of your questions.
Good morning.
Madam Chair and board members, I'm Mark Lee, the staff attorney for the Enforcement Division, and I'm also the attorney who handled the case in front of the SOA judge.
Do you all have questions of staff?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jeffries?
I'd like to have a brief comment on how this got raised to the level of severity that it did for the staff and the staff attorney in terms of penalty and what was requested in as punishment.
Well, there were a number of infractions, first of all, but the primary impetus and what we focused on at the hearing was the non-remedial nature of the case, because Mr. Fuentes repeatedly and habitually lied both to us, to the clients, to the SOA judge, and if you note on, I believe it's page 12, her phrase in that regard was, respondent's actions in this case indicate a disregard for the truth. And it wasn't just one time. In fact, I've noted 6 instances. He lied to his clients. He must have lied to his trainee with regard to getting credit for these appraisals. He misrepresented to the board when he submitted the log trying to get credit for his trainee. He misrepresented a second time to the board when he answered the complaint. He misrepresented a third time to the board when he filed his discovery responses, and he misrepresented things to the SOA judge. So we just felt there was no alternative in this case because he just would not ever tell the truth.
Thank you.
Are there other questions of staff? What is the desired action of the board?
I'm not going to do it.
So, hearing silence, let me give you what your options are, so that maybe that will help us. You can accept the recommendation of the SOA judge for the PFD. You can amend it under very strict terms if you find typographical errors or technical inaccuracies, or you can assemble to executive session for additional instruction. And Ms. Warman, did I state those correctly? Is there any other option to this board?
You stated them correctly, Madam Chair, with one minor exception. If the board accepts, it's actually a motion to adopt the PFD.
Thank you. I figured I needed some tutorial.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Sulster?
I move that we adopt the actions of the recommended sanctions of the PFD.
And just to clarify the motion, is it a motion to adopt the entire PFD?
The entire PFD.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. And see, Kristen, that's why we're so hesitant, because these words, they have to be so correct. Anyway, we have a motion and a second. Is there additional discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously. We have already had one executive session, so we will move past agenda item number 8 and move to our committee and working group reports. Agenda item number 9 is report by the Appraiser Continuing Education Working Group.
Hello. Madam Chair, can you?
We go.
Hello, good morning. Tony Slagle.
Tony, try it again.
Hello?
That's
There we
better.
go. I apologize. Good morning, everybody. Tony Slagle, Government Affairs for the Board. I am presenting the report for the working group. The TLC Texas ACE Working Group met via teleconference on April 11th. Working group members in attendance via teleconference were Ronnie Wilson, Joe Waller, Tony Pastilli, and Greg Stevens. Denise Wisnot was also in attendance via telephone. She's with Texas A&M Real Estate Center. Members of the board staff that were attending were Kristen Warman, Troy Bollier, Tony Slagle, myself, Gwen Jackson, and Jennifer Wheeler. The purpose of this meeting was to review the draft course materials book that was prepared by Denise Wisnot for materials provided by the working group previously. We were able to review roughly half of the book. Edits were made to the book, and additional assignments were given to working group members. Based on that review, we're currently planning on scheduling another meeting, hopefully within the next month, to finish the work on reviewing that initial draft and going over those additional assignments. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Agenda item number 10, report by the Budget Committee, which I believe...
Madam Chair, I'll be presenting today in the absence of Mr. Black. The Budgetary Committee did meet today at 8:30 a.m. We met with the Commissioner as well as many members of the staff, as well as two special guests from the Texas Sunset Advisory Commission, Kay and Rachel. Kay, I apologize, I'm not going to try. And then Rachel Gandy. But we were appreciative of your attendance to our meeting. In the meeting, our basic agenda was to go over the budget for 2018 and get an update through 6 months. And then we also began conversation of the budget for 19 and went over various items, both on the expenditure and the revenue side. I believe the Commissioner will go over that in detail later with his report. But beyond that, it was a good meeting, an hour and 15 minutes, and we feel like we're on track through 6 months, and we'll get updated again at the third quarter. But I'll open it to any questions at this point, but it was primarily focused on the budget for 18 and 19.
Thank you, Mr. Pena, and thank you to the committee members that are serving. I realize some of you have moved into that capacity, and as I guess this was your first meeting, so I hope you enjoyed it, and hope you got the opportunity to learn something. I always try and put board members on that committee because I think it's an opportunity to delve into the details, and I think it's helpful. You get a great chance to see our staff shine. They do a great job as it relates to administratively handling this organization. Any questions of the Budget Committee report? We'll move to agenda item number 11, report by the Enforcement Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since February 9th, 2018, board meeting, the Enforcement Committee met on April 3rd, 2018 at 10 a.m. In person and via teleconference. The committee members in attendance were myself, Buster Renfro, and Mr. Pena. Other board members in attendance was Madam Chair, and staff in attendance included the Commissioner, Kristen Warman, the General Counsel, Tony Slagle, Troy Bollier, Mark Lee, and Dion Frederick. Members of the public that were in attendance were Joe Waller with FACT, Greg Stevens with FACT, Alan Gardner with FACT, and Amel Stafford with FACT. The committee considered several items at its meeting, including changes to education and experience requirements for licensing adopted by the Appraisal Qualifications Board that will take effect on May 1, 2018. The committee recommended that the board adopt emergency rules to implement these AQB changes in Texas to coincide with the AQB effective date of May 1, 2018. The committee also recommended the board propose amendments through the normal rulemaking process to implement the AQB changes on a permanent basis. In addition to these possible rule changes, the committee also considered proposed amendments to Chapter 153 of the board's rules as part of the board's quadrennial rule review process. The committee recommends that certain amendments be adopted on an emergency basis to comply with comments received from the appraisal subcommittee during their biennial compliance review visit in February of 2018, and also recommends several amendments for proposal through the normal rulemaking process. Finally, the committee considered feedback received from the ASC regarding Section 1103-452 of the Occupations Code and related enforcement processes. The committee asked staff to report on current processes and possible alternatives for investigating complaints involving pending litigation at the next committee meeting. The committee did not set a new meeting date.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. Sounds like you all were busy.
Yes, ma'am.
We appreciate your efforts on that front. The next item is agenda. Are there any questions of Mr. Bolton about the enforcement report? Hearing none, we'll move to agenda item number 12, report by the Executive Committee. I'll present that report today. Your Executive Committee met on Friday, April the 12th via teleconference and personal appearance. Those committee members present were myself, Martha Gale Reed Lynch, sometimes known as Martha Gale Black, teasing, Buster Renfro, your commissioner, Kristen Warman, and Troy Bullier was present for part of that meeting as well. We had an extensive agenda as well. Many of those items will be expanded on in today's meeting as they deal with potential recommendations for rules, etc. We discussed changes to the FBI fingerprinting rules and the fingerprinting process. You can expect some new or future proposed rules as soon as we get additional information from the FBI. We anticipate that you'll be hearing those items potentially either in August or November. The good news about the FBI rule as it relates to identity and licensing is it has the opportunity to potentially lower fees if we can get the rules put in place to, as we are anticipating at this moment. We also discussed actions and preliminary review from the appraisal subcommittee, as well as the enforcement committee addressed some of those issues as well. Though we will have a detailed conversation regarding that on agenda item number 19. We discussed education providers that were discovered offering unapproved education courses. Essentially, courses were being offered online that had not been approved for online education. They had been approved for in-person education. And we made a recommendation to the Education Committee to bring back some rules. I believe that will also be addressed in a future agenda item today. We discussed the possibility of adopting a disclaimer for appraisers that are providing evaluation services for commercial real estate transactions that are exempt from a federal rule by certain requirements. That has also moved forward onto your agenda as an action item, both potentially as an emergency action item, I believe it's agenda item 20, and as a regular rule item in 22. And finally, there was an extensive discussion about the possibility of the organization implementing a investigator trainee type program, and that really resulted from a personnel change that I believe Doug will speak to you about in his staff report. And there was extensive conversation about the concept and an encouragement to continue to work towards the development of a future training program in our organization. That essentially concludes the actions or recommendations that you will hear further information about later today. Are there any questions regarding the Executive Committee report? Hearing none, we will move to staff reports.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members. Welcome to your regular quarterly meeting. We are grateful, as always, for your continued diligence in service to implementing policies for consumer protection and valuation services in Texas. This meeting, of course, is a bit earlier than normally planned. We would normally be meeting in the middle of May, but I appreciate your willingness to accommodate a timely consideration of the pending Appraiser Qualification Board changes, and also meeting ahead of the upcoming meeting of the Association of Appraiser Regulatory Officials, who will meet early in May. Welcome today to several representatives of the Foundation Appraiser Coalition of Texas who are with us for our meeting. We're always happy to have stakeholder groups engage in ongoing conversation with us, and so we welcome that. It has been an extraordinarily busy and quite challenging time at the agency since we last met together in February with our appraisal subcommittee policy managers. We've just received their interim report, and our deputy commissioner and general counsel will make a presentation on the appraisal subcommittee review later in the meeting today. One other thing that you will hear, but I wanted to report on it. Well, actually, you may not hear it otherwise. The ASC also changed the anticipated the target date for the creation of the AMC National Registry. That was supposed to be ready for states to begin adding AMCs, if they wished, to that national registry as of June 4th, and that has been postponed for 6 weeks. The new date is July the 16th. We recently shared with you the open letter that we sent out to all of our stakeholders acknowledging our shortcomings with respect to customer service expectations and things that we hold ourselves accountable to, standards that we hold ourselves accountable to that we have not been living up to. And so we sent an open letter to our stakeholders and the people of Texas. One, apologizing for not living up to those standards, and then explaining what we were doing to get ourselves back on track. So I just wanted to hit a couple of highlights on that. We're adding 4 additional staff members to our reception and communication services division. We've extended the call center business hours to 11 and a half hours 12 and a half hours every business day, from 6:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. We also have changed some of the language that you hear when you are waiting on hold to provide additional options for our people who are trying to reach the agency to leave us information and to actually get a call back. We published, many of the calls are about where are you in processing my application? Where do I stand? And so we have actually published on our website where we are. We update it every week, how far we're up to this particular date on this particular type of transaction. And so if you know that you submitted your application after that, you can go to the website and see, okay, well they're just not to me yet, so I don't need to make that phone call. So hopefully our wait times and our call volumes will go down somewhat on that. So we've also improved some other areas of the website content. We did some additional customer service training for all of our staff, and we implemented a brand new, very short customer service survey that we can review more frequently and respond more quickly to areas of concern. We're also evaluating a new call center management software system. We recently upgraded to voice over IP phones across the agency. We're working to maximize the potential, the features available through that system, as well as looking at a new customer relation management, if you will, call center management piece of software that would be integrated with our back-end database. And that would take a couple of minutes off of every call if we were able to do that. So we're looking at that. Also, a new smart identification process to more rapidly connect folks doing business with us with the kinds of services that they want. So when they go on to renew a license, let's say, it recognizes them and anticipates what their needs are. So happy to answer any questions about that process. I want to renew our commitment to our stakeholders and to the people of Texas to restore what we have long had a very good and in some ways an exceptional reputation with respect to customer service that in the last 15 months, through a whole variety of reasons, has slipped far beyond what we consider acceptable for ourselves and holding ourselves accountable. And so we commit to get back to where we should have been, and should remain. March was the culmination of the strategic plan listening tour. We went to 7 field locations and met with groups as small as 40 and up to over 100, talking about things that were going on with the agency and listening, asking a series of questions that you guys had approved on topics, and listening. And that report, the results of the listening tour, are integrated into the strategic plan report, which is available at item number 27, agenda item 27, and we'll go over that in more detail at that time. And I think that listening tour also sparked the continued dialogue that will continue today with the Foundation Appraiser Coalition of Texas as well. As was mentioned earlier, we have both Kay Rissick and Rachel Gandy with us today, representing the Sunset Advisory Commission staff. And that process has launched with we had a 3-hour meeting with the staff of the commission last week, and correspondence has gone out to the chairs explaining what the Sunset Advisory Commission process looks like this year in preparation for the legislative session, which is the culmination of the Sunset Review process. So in between, there will be a lot of in-depth meetings internally between the agency staff and the Sunset Commission staff. And there'll be plenty of opportunity for public input as well during that process. And then this fall, there will actually be a public hearing where all of that information that has been gleaned on how the agency is doing, whether its mission remains viable, and whether there are areas for improvement or expansion or contraction, all of those kinds of things that the Commission kind of specializes in, efficiency and effectiveness, and fairness. So those are values that we share with them. And so we look forward to engaging in that process and encourage all of our commissioners and board members to be involved as well, and all of our stakeholders when we get to the public hearing process. If there are any questions about how that will work, there'll be a report that will be published this fall, and some recommendations. We'll have the opportunity for input, both as those are formed, and then a formal response as well once the report comes out. And I believe there will be additional opportunity to, if anyone from the board or commission wants to engage directly with them, that is always, I think, would be welcome as well. So, this being May, of course, one of the big things that we do as part of the development of policy is this is the first draft of the budget, proposed budget for next year. And so you heard the report from our interim acting chair of the budget committee, and so I'll be presenting that under agenda item 28. One of the things that that I'll note ahead of time with respect to that is that the budget includes a position that we currently have open. We're not filled for one of our appraiser investigators. Okay, so we had one of our appraiser investigators left the agency, and so we have that open position. That the position is fully funded in the draft budget. And that's the area where we were discussing some potential for creating. It's difficult to attract at the specific set of skills that we need for a certified general appraiser with investigatory skills at salaries that we can afford to pay. And so we've been looking at the option and discussing it, as our chair mentioned in the executive committee report, of potentially exploring the possibility of training someone into that position. So getting someone that already has some appraiser credentials, but training them as a general certified appraiser investigator. So we'll continue to work through that and bring those recommendations to you. We were very, very mindful that that's a highly unusual approach from a government regulatory perspective. But it may become, well, one, this board and this agency has never shied away from being first at anything. And often with very positive results. And so we'll be very carefully considering the potential for conflict, and how do we minimize that, and how would we do the training without having a double standard for internal versus external, all those kinds of things. So just wanted to assure you that we will be very careful as we explore those options. I think that is all of the information that I needed to confirm to you or remind you of. Of course, we'll go into more depth on several of the items in the agenda today. I'm happy to answer any questions. All right, then. I'll turn it over to the rest of the staff.
Madam Chair and board members, your General Counsel and Deputy Commissioner Kristen Warman here. I just wanted to point out a couple of items to you and give you a preview, because you'll hear about both of these later on in your agenda in multiple areas and items. You heard, and you are all aware, because when we last spoke in February, the AQB has announced changes to the education and experience criteria required to obtain an appraiser's license. The AQB being the Appraiser Qualifications Board, who is responsible under federal law for determining the criteria required to obtain an appraiser's license. These changes will go into effect on May 1st of 2018. So on your agenda are several items, including emergency rules and proposals for permanent rules that would make these changes effective in Texas. You may recall under Chapter 1103, specifically in Section 1103-151, Texas law requires the board to adopt those criteria established by the AQB to obtain an appraiser's license. And we will have a discussion on what those criteria are in greater detail as we move through the agenda. In addition, you heard the commissioner mention that we received the preliminary review report from the appraisal subcommittee. They were here in February to conduct their biennial compliance review of our licensing and regulatory program. On that report, just to give you a preview, they identified 2 areas of concern with regard to our reporting of information to the National Registry. The National Registry is that database that basically provides a list of all appraisers that are eligible to perform work in federally related transactions. That's a publicly available database that reports disciplinary actions taken by the board, and so it's very important to the appraisal subcommittee that the information we report to that registry is accurate. And we have taken steps to amend our internal processes to address the areas of concern identified by the appraisal subcommittee, and you will also be considering rule changes to address some of those concerns as well. And with that, I conclude my report unless you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Roman.
Hello, Lori Deanda, Director of Reception and Communication Services. Please refer to the C1 report. In the month of February, we received a total of 29,376 calls, assisted 351 walk-ins, and responded to 12,408 emails. The next report is the Survey C2 report. In the month of February 2018, we received a total of 77 surveys. 36 included comments and contact information. The top 3 categories with the most comments were in regards to the TREC website, application processing, and the hold time. And of the 77 surveys, 7 were submitted by appraisers. And of the 36 surveys with comments and contact information, all 36 were resolved. The next report is a C3 report. The report for the second quarter is from December 2017 through February 2018. The average hold time was 18 minutes and 15 seconds, and the average length of time to conclude the call was 6 minutes. Now, due to the high volume of calls we receive, our goal is to reduce the hold time. And as Mr. Olmixon mentioned, I'll just give you a summary of it. 1, we are adding the 4 additional staff members to RCS, so we're looking forward to hiring them as soon as possible. Our work shift went from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., and it's now 6:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. So the best time to contact our agency is from 6:30 to 7 a.m. and 6 to 7 p.m. This is when we receive the lowest amount of calls. The application renewal processing dates have been posted on the TREC and TALCB website. And 4, we changed the overflow message, which informs the 31st caller to, before they were informed to call back or send an email. Now the message instructs them to either call back or send an email with their name, license number, question, and a phone number, and we will contact them so that they're not having to wait for them to try to get a hold of us. We're trying to assist them in the best way possible. So that concludes my report. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a couple.
Yes.
Do we track the hang-ups? In other words, are these incoming calls including people that hang up because the hold time's extensive?
Yes, the number of calls that are received in this report includes all of the numbers that made the attempt to contact us, but either went into the queue and disconnected the call, or they were the 31st caller.
Do we have any way to gauge how many of those actually connected with help?
Yes, I can tell you that, let's see.
And while you're looking, again, just for the public's sake, because I'm not sure that they can always see the numbers, one of the problems that we're having is in December, for instance, the total calls in to the agency were 18,763. Our January call volume was 32,535, and our February call volume was 29,376. So no doubt we already were having hold time issues, but when we look at an increase that is as significant as that over the last couple of months, it certainly creates a problem.
Right.
So I'm sorry, you were looking, are you able to tell me how
Yes,
many of
ma'am.
them actually connected through?
Yes. Okay, so for February, the total is 29,376 calls, but 9,933 calls are the ones that RCS were able to assist.
So
So not-
approximately 20,000 of those
Yes, it was
are-
19,443.
And Commissioner, is there any way, is it possible that this is some licensing cycle that's causing the significant steps up in the call? And is there any way for us to gauge that as we move forward?
Well, we have, so over the last 4 years, we have added net 8 to 10,000 new license holders. Now, that's principally, or almost exclusively, sales agents on the real estate side, okay? However, we have a consolidated call center, so all the calls come into the same. So there is a significant number of increases, but the third year, we've only had the problem in not meeting our targets for call waiting under 10 minutes and processing within 10 days, all the benchmarks that we use. That started to slip in November of 16 when we updated the database. And then later on, 3 months later, we updated the website as well. All of those without, so there were two years before that where we had absorbed 20,000 new license holders without it affecting our responsiveness. But kind of the perfect storm there, we got ourselves into a hole that we have not been able to incrementally get out of, and so that's why we just went kind of overall said we need to rethink this from scratch.
Well, and I appreciate that. So the hold time goal is 10 minutes and the processing goal is 10 days?
Correct. Those are benchmarks we hold ourselves accountable to.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the concentrated effort towards fixing it, because we
Yes.
certainly are hearing the frustration. And certainly if 20,000 if we can figure out a way to get the information
Yes.
to the individuals while they're on the phone, then we probably would save ourselves at least half of those call-ins.
Right. Also, just to mention, the total number of calls that are received could be from the same person that has attempted to contact us multiple times and couldn't get through. So it may not really be that many people that are contacting us.
Well, no, and I understand that,
Yeah.
because that's the reporting we're getting, is I called and waited 10 minutes and hung up, and I called and waited 15 minutes and hung up, and I called and finally, and quite frankly, part of the frustration I hear from our stakeholders, if you will, is that I did that twice, and then I finally hold for 18 or 20 minutes, and I reach someone, and in 4 or 5 minutes, I'm off the phone. Right? And so it's a balance problem for them, that
Right, and that's
they've
why I
invested
wanted-
50 minutes of their time and got 5 of ours back.
Right. And that's why one of the options is for us to contact them back, is to leave them satisfied and just try to continue to offer exceptional customer service.
I think that's a good idea. And I recognize that you're trying to solve a problem,
Yes.
and we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair? May I ask a question?
Yes, sir, Mr. Belton?
I'm curious, with the callback procedure that you have in place, how long does that take before that stakeholder would receive a call back?
The way it's handled right now, it comes in through an email, which we forward it to an individual that gets to it as soon as possible. As soon as he receives it, he contacts them, which has been within 2 business days.
Okay.
I have a question as well. Commissioner, when do you expect that new software on the telephone to be available? I think it's a great idea with options and using technology at the best we can.
So without, I in no way want to be seen as evasive, but I can't give you a specific date. Right now, we're doing 2 things. One is trying to maximize with DIR the call tree functions, and perhaps there's even a call back function that's available with the current software as an option. We could optimize the current software that they have for the voice over IP. All that's being evaluated. At the same time, because we didn't actually believe that was going to be the solution, we looked at a massive new comprehensive call center management software program. These would cost $100,000 plus to put in, and we've evaluated two of those systems, and they're highly complex, and we're not yet convinced that they will work seamlessly with the voice over IP system that we currently have. So getting all of that technical evaluation done before we even get to the business case is really the holdup right now, because we'll spend what we need to fix it, but we have to be buying something that's going to work.
Thank you.
Yes. It seems like, and the chair brought this up, that it seems like this time of the year, at least I know I get most of the phone calls about this same problem. And it goes to the fact that there could be a cycle where this is when we receive most of the renewals. I don't know, it's something to watch. But it also seems to me that most of the people who call and complain to me, they're trying to put a phone call into you to find out what the status of the renewal is. Mm-hmm. And so it seems that if we could get all of this processed quicker, including the renewals, and I'm sure we'll hear something about that later, yes, the calls might fall off drastically. So it kind of all comes together that we have this backlog. Right. And I don't know if it's seasonal or not, but if it is, it would seem like that would be something we could resolve with just giving it a little thought of how to spread some of these renewals out. I know we can't do anything about new applications, mm-hmm, but it would certainly seem that if we're getting a bulk of renewals at a certain time of the year, that we ought to figure out a way to make your job a lot easier by simply spreading them out. Now, that I may be making it sound easier than it probably is, but we ought to give it some thought if that indeed is the problem. Now, I know this time of the year I seem to get calls, and again, I can't get anybody to tell me what the status of my renewal is. So they kind of go together.
Right. And we do receive calls in that subject, and that's why staff is volunteering to work overtime and do the best that they can to get caught up with the processing timeframes.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. Gwen Jackson, Director of Education and Licensing Services. I'd like to first make you aware that we have 3 new ELS team members that I'd like to introduce to you this afternoon. All 3 joined the agency on April the 16th. First, we have Rhonda Reed. She is our newest licensing specialist who came to us from the Department of State Health Services, where she's worked for the last 4 years. Ms. Reed worked in the newborn health screening program, providing customer service, reviewing documents, and performing data entry in a fast-paced team environment. She was raised in Los Angeles, California, and enjoys family time, cooking, shopping, and visiting her new grandbaby. Rhonda. Next, we have Rebecca Bennett. Rebecca is one of our education specialists. She's responsible for reviewing our education provider, instructor, and course applications. Rebecca has a PhD in educational psychology from the University of Texas at Austin and a bachelor's degree from Middlebury College in Vermont. In addition to teaching and performing research at the university level, she's worked as an editor for an education publishing company and contracted with multiple Texas state agencies. Now, we originally hired Rebecca as a temporary employee when one of our own team members was away for several weeks, and she did such a good job that we hired her when she applied for the position after one of our education specialists was promoted. Rebecca. Our third new team member is Mary Beth Hanna, who is our new administrative assistant. She comes to us from the Department of State Health Services, where she worked in the newborn screening department for over 2 years. She grew up in Dripping Springs, Texas, and earned her Bachelor's of Science degree in finance from UT. In her spare time, Mary Beth enjoys being involved with the community, spending time with her family, being outdoors, and watching her kids play sports. Mary Beth. I'd also like to announce that we recently assigned Kim O'Connor to become our TALCB education specialist. Kim is away on vacation today, but is pleased to accept this role. She's been with the agency for over 5 years, reviewing and processing real estate education, provider, instructor, and course applications. Kim has been trained to review and process TALCB courses and has done so well that she's been reassigned. Thank you. Now I'd like for you to turn to your first report in your packet for ELS, which is on page 126 of your meeting materials. This report provides the number of certification and licenses for TALCB. At the end of February, there were 6,159 active appraisers, which is 98 more than our totals were a year ago. I'd also like to note that at the end of February, there were 928 appraiser trainees, which is historically the highest number of trainees that we've ever had. There were also 202 inactive appraisers and 147 out-of-state temporary registrations. Now, you may notice that the number of temporary registrants is lower than what was reported to you at the last meeting. We found an error in our calculations, and we've now accurately recalculated that total. Moving on to the next report. This report is for the appraisal management companies, or our AMC registrations. To summarize this report, since September, we've registered 5 AMCs and currently have a total of 174 AMC registrants. Please recall that the majority of our AMCs became registered in 2012 when the AMC program was first implemented. Because they renew every 2 years, we experience spikes in renewal activity every even-numbered year. For this reason, we're anticipating a high volume of renewals this calendar year for AMCs. The next report is the L1 report. It provides February fiscal year comparisons for applications received, licenses issued, and renewals. Our fiscal year comparisons are quite similar to what they were a year ago. We've received 435 original applications this year compared to 439 in 2017. 356 total licenses issued from original applications compared to 385 the prior year. 1,245 renewal licenses were issued compared to 1,424. And 12 late renewal licenses were issued compared to 14 a year ago. The next report in your packet is of our examination activity. The top half of this report provides year-to-date results from September 2017 through February 2018. A total of 119 examinations were taken during this period. Our year-to-date pass rates for the licensed residential appraiser is 54%. It's 47.9% for certified residential and 67.6% for certified general, for an overall pass rate of 55.4%. Then the bottom half of this report provides the pass rates that are strictly for the month of February. The last ELS report is of the year-to-date comparison for examination activity as of February. The pass rate, as you'll see, for certified general in 2017 was 71.8%. It's currently 67.6%. Certified residential appraiser pass rate was 61.5% and is currently 47.9%. Licensed residential was 51.1% and is currently at 54%, while the overall pass rate was 60.4% and is currently 55.4%. Now, during the last meeting, Board Member Renfro asked me to provide information on the national pass rate for the appraiser exam. So I do have that information for you. For calendar year ending December 2017, the national pass rate for the certified general appraiser was at 71%. Certified residential was at 73%. The licensed residential was at 67%, for an overall pass rate of 71%. That concludes my reports. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for getting that information. Appreciate it.
Good afternoon. Steve Spropoulos, Director of Information and Technology Services Division. So before I get into the I-1 report, I have a couple of updates for you. So over the course of the last 3 to 6 months, we've been focusing on customer service, and specifically, how can we, as a service organization within TREC, TALCB, serve the other divisions that are they serving customers, right? And so what we've done is we've tried to implement some small, short-term, quick fixes and working on long-term solutions as well. But in terms of short, quick fixes, we did a couple of things that are to note and have had an effect on the amount of calls that we're getting. One of them is when you register for a new application on our website, you have to identify yourself, and then you have to say whether or not you're a robot by typing in a bunch of random characters in that screen so that the system knows that you're not trying to create a fake account, right? Well, those numbers and letters were very confusing sometimes and difficult to read, so they would generate phone calls because people couldn't get through that screen and they needed our assistance. So we've upgraded that little robot CAPTCHA, is what it's called, to version 2, which just simply lets you check a box, and then a window pops up where you can see a picture of a car and it says, tell us which box the car is in, and you click on that and then you're done. So that has had that positive effect on getting through that screen. In addition to that, we have a system in the website that tracks the customer surveys. The system would amalgamate the data, and it was difficult for Lori and her team to get that in a summarized format, so we've done that for her. So now she can simply click on a button and get a summary of the surveys, and she can compare over time and see how her team is doing. So we've implemented that as well. In addition to those changes, over the course of the last 3 months, we went through what we call the cybersecurity test. And that is something that the Department of Information Resources of Texas does every year. They try to penetrate our system and try to get through our firewall and see what they can access and if they can hack us. And then they produce a report and they give it to us, and we have some findings that we have to address on our security. This year was very successful because they were unable to penetrate any of our major systems. In fact, they had very small findings, things that were not in any way significantly impacting, like in the previous years, where we actually had to take action and, sort of plug those holes, if you will, in our network. We no longer have that. So it was the best performance since this test started 5 years ago. And I was asked to report that to you. Before I get into my reports, do you have any questions about those items? Okay. So for the I-1 report, we had, for the fiscal year to date total, we had increases from 3.5 million total pages viewed last fiscal year to date to this fiscal year to date, above 4 million. Our total monthly unique visits went from 141,000 as a total for that previous fiscal year to date to 213,000 this fiscal year to date. And when we look at our online transactions and how much of the online transactions are actually being used, we went up from 51 to 64% for applications, 90 to 93% for renewals, and all of our AMC panel transactions are being done online. Next, the I-2 report is a graphical representation of the I-1 report over time. As you can see, for the latest month, for the latest reported month of February, our applications are up and above 60%. And for the renewals, we are currently at 91.3% for the month of February. And for our panels online throughout the whole year, everything's done using the internet and not on paper. Any questions about those reports? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Priscilla Pifo again, Director of Staff and Support Services. Before I present my information, I would like to introduce the newest member of our team, Tawana Hood. Tawana is our HR generalist. We are very happy to have her on our team. Ms. Hood was raised in Austin as a 2012 graduate of St. Edward's in organizational communications. She has 23 years of state service from the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles and Texas Department of Transportation, where she was an executive assistant and a human resources specialist. She enjoys activities of outdoors, spending time with family and friends. And again, we are very pleased to have Tawana with us. And before I get into the budget status report, I want to give the Staff and Support Services part in helping with improving the customer service experience. As everyone has reported so far, we're all really pulling together to try to fix this issue. When Mr. Oldmixon presented to us that this was the #1 priority of the agency, we all came together to determine in what ways we could help. We've all been loaning staff members to come in and work on weekends or work when they can to be trained to help with processes. And we have also been working with Lori very closely on the call center procurement, which you were requesting information about earlier. And as Mr. Oldmixon mentioned, that's a very complex process. We want to make sure that we get in place what it is exactly that we need so that we are not disrupting any of the customer experience right now, and we are continuing to enhance it. We're also looking at the voice over internet protocol of VoIP phones that we had installed. We've had DIR in to explain to us some of the features, help us to maximize them, as well as to understand the appropriate staffing, and they've even given us data that's helped us with understanding the appropriate staffing level that we should have, given the amount of time that we would like our customers to spend online on hold. So that's been very helpful, and we appreciate the DIR help that they've given us. One thing that you'll find we will not have in this particular budget status report, but in future ones, is we have authorized overtime, and that is for non-exempt employees to receive if they come in on the weekends and work. So you'll see that in the next few months. We also, so then I can go on into the budget status report. And in the proposed budget that you see next, actually, that Mr. Oldmixon will be presenting, there will be the additional staff that he spoke of, as well as additional training for customer service and the software upgrades. So the budget status report for February, we're about halfway through the fiscal year. We're just about where we would expect to be with expenditures, as well as with revenue. And as you'll recall, in even-numbered years, the revenue towards the end of the fiscal year is when we'll tend to see the rest of the revenue coming in. So that's about where we would expect to be. As far as the investment report goes, if we can move on to the next, please. We've got about $1,020,000 in our investments, with about $428,000 reserved for operations. If there are no questions, I would be glad to address questions. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. Troy Bollier, Director of Standards and Enforcement Services Division. Before I jump into my regular reports, I wanted to make two comments. One, I'm very proud and happy to announce that very recently one of our appraiser investigators, Robin Forrester, obtained his AQB certified USPAP instructor credential. So we're very proud of Robin and all the hard work that he's done to reach that milestone. The other point I wanted to make very briefly was that just as the other directors have mentioned, my staff has also been trying to come together as a larger agency team and contribute to tackling this customer service challenge. Principally, we've been doing that by loaning other staff members who have some expertise in, say, for example, processing documents and that kind of thing. So we're continuing to put in that effort so that we can overcome that challenge. I'll point you to the E1 report for appraisers that you have in front of you. And you can see in the bottom left-hand corner that we have 126 cases open. This is through the end of the month of February. And as you see in the top half of the report, so far this year we've opened roughly 142 matters, and about 60 of those have been complaints. And then you can see in the bottom half that we've closed 155 complaints for a total of 245 matters. So we're closing more than we're opening. The second E1 report regarding appraisal management companies, there's very little activity to report here. You can see that we have 5 AMC complaint matters currently open. So far this fiscal year, we've opened 3. And as you can see, we have closed 4. So there has not been a lot of movement or activity in regards to AMC complaints. The next report, total open complaints, gives you a sense of how many cases we have based on the fiscal year. As you can see, primarily we're focused on 2017 and 2018. We do have one very old request for assistance case, and as you'll recall, those are law enforcement requests for our assistance that we do not have control over closing. However, I do have information from the prosecutor in that case that they're going to trial in early May, so I'm hopeful that that will soon be closed. The next time you see this report, 2016, will no longer be on there because we've closed all of those. So we're primarily focusing, obviously, on 2017 and 18 cases. And as you can see, the total one-year-old row at the bottom there, as of the end of February, we only had 6 matters that are over a year. 2 of those you approved earlier today on the agenda as an agreed final order. One of them is that request for assistance I mentioned, and then 3 of them are appraisal management company complaints that we're trying to prioritize and get resolved. If you look at the next slide for complaint resolutions during this fiscal year, again, this is through the end of the month of February, we have 159 total complaints resolved in the pie chart there. And on the right-hand side, you can see the breakdown. Roughly 65% of them, just over 100, are dismissals of some type. And then the remaining 55 are some form of disciplinary action. The NOAV default final order is a little bit of an anomaly because there was a rather high number of those associated with one particular individual. And as you can see, so far we have 28 agreed resolutions, either agreed final orders or voluntary surrenders. On the bottom right-hand side of the page, you can see the recidivism rate, which is at just over 9%. And again, just as a reminder, that is a look back over the current fiscal year and the prior 2 fiscal years to see if someone who is being disciplined has also been previously disciplined during that time frame. And then you can see underneath the pie chart, you get a sense of just how many of our license holders are actually having some type of disciplinary action, and it's a very small number. So far for FY 2018, it's 0.3% of our roughly 6,500 license holders. If you take a look at the next slide, this is just a graphical representation of the number of complaints that have been received broken down by license type. And you can see there for FY 2018, the majority of the complaint matters are filed against certified residential appraisers, and then the next highest is certified general. And then the last slide addresses staff-initiated complaints based on experience audits. And on the left-hand side, you have a bar chart showing the last 3 fiscal years, the activity there broken down by the nature of the party involved in the complaint. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that during a longer extended period, basically FY 2009 to the present, we've had a total of 57 staff-initiated complaints. And I actually pulled some figures to put that in perspective, because it turns out that is a very small number. During that same period, we had roughly just over 2,100 complaints. And so that 57 that were actually staff-initiated comes out to be about 2.66% of all the complaints over that time period. So obviously it's occurring, but it's a very small number, only when the circumstances warrant. I'm happy to take any questions you might have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. Tony Slagle, Government Affairs. I am presenting a report that we do annually we've been doing it probably, I think, for about the last 4 years. It's a breakdown of the demographics of appraisers in the state of Texas. The first chart up there is Texas specific. As you can see, that in terms of ethnicity and gender, we've stayed pretty static in terms of the numbers, and the population is trending older over the time period we've been looking at in the state of Texas. The next slide is a comparison of Texas to national numbers. The national numbers are taken from an AI survey of a roughly, it's about 2,000 people, 2,000 appraisers, and we compare those numbers to our numbers. The difference is mostly significant, or statistically insignificant in terms of ethnicity and gender, in terms of the difference. But if you look at the age numbers, Texas is actually slightly younger than the national averages. We've got 44% of our appraisers are under 50, whereas the national numbers show around 38%. I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair and board members, next on your agenda is item 14, discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to 22 TAC, Chapter 157, Subchapter A, specifically Sections 157.4, Computation of Time, and Section 157.8, Order Modifications. The amendments to these rules add the mailbox rule from Section 157.9 of this chapter to Section 157.4 to make clear that the mailbox rule applies to all required notices sent to license holders and all correspondence between TALCB and license holders. The amendments to Section 157 clarify that a license holder must be in compliance with the terms of an order issued by the board at the time the license holder submits a request to modify the order. These amendments are being proposed as part of the agency's quadrennial, they're before you, and they were proposed as part of the quadrennial rule review process at your meeting in February, and at that time, the Enforcement Committee had reviewed and recommended them for proposal. We received no comments on the amendments as proposed, and staff recommends adopting the amendments as published.
Are there questions?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jeffries?
I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit for adoption amendments to 22 TAC 157.4, computation of time, and 157.8 order modifications, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Jeffries, second by Mr. Bolton. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Move to agenda item number 15.
Similar to agenda item 14, before you in this agenda item is the discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to section 157.9, notice of hearing. The amendments to this section remove language regarding the mailbox rule from this section, since that same language is being added to section 157.4 of this chapter, which you just considered and approved. Again, these amendments were proposed in February as part of the agency's quadrennial rule review process, and the Enforcement Committee had recommended their proposal at that time. No comments were received on the amendments as proposed, and staff recommends adopting the amendments as published.
Mr. Renfro? Got a motion for me?
Madam Chair, I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit for adoption amendments to 22 Texas Administrative Code 157.9, notice of hearing, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption.
Second.
We have a motion for Mr. Renfro, second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We'll move to agenda item number 16.
Madam Chair and board members, before you in this agenda item are possible action to adopt amendments to subchapter C of chapter 157, specifically sections 157.15, 157.16, 157.17, and 157.18. The amendments to 157.15 clarify the format for an administrative law judge to use when preparing a proposal for decision for consideration by the board. The amendments to section 157.16 correct a typographical error and clarify that exceptions and replies should be filed with, not by, the administrative law judge. The amendments to section 157.17 correct a grammatical error and add clarifying language for consistency throughout that section. The amendments to section 157.18 add clarifying language for consistency throughout that section. Again, these amendments were proposed in February as part of the board's quadrennial rule review process, and the Enforcement Committee recommended their proposal at that time. No comments have been received on the amendments as proposed, and staff recommends adopting the amendments as published.
Madam Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit for adoption amendments to 22 TAC Sections 157.15, Decision 157.16, Exceptions and Replies 157.17, Final Decisions and Orders, and 157.18, Motions for rehearing, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That motion also passes unanimously. We'll move to agenda item number 17.
Madam Chair and board members, the rule before you in this agenda item is section 157.25, temporary suspension. The amendments to this section, correct a typographical error, clarify that a temporary suspension is different from a disciplinary proceeding, and clarify that determinations to be made by the disciplinary panel. Again, these amendments were proposed in February as part of the board's quadrennial rule review process. No comments were received on the amendments as proposed, and staff recommends adopting the amendments as published.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Bolton?
move that the staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit for adoption amendments to Chapter 22, Texas Administrative Code, Section 157, 25, temporary suspension, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption.
Second.
A motion by Mr. Bolton, second by Mr. Pena. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? We will move to agenda item number 18, discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 157, Subchapter E, Alternative Dispute Resolution.
Madam Chair and board members, the amendments before you in this agenda item include sections 157.30, Alternative Dispute Resolution, 157.32, Negotiated Settlement, 157.33, Mediation, 157.37, Agreements. The amendments to Section 157.30 clarify that only the board or its staff, not an administrative law judge, may utilize a contingent dismissal as the means for resolving a contested case. The amendments to Section 157.32 clarify that negotiations may be conducted through email. The amendments to Section 157.33 correct a grammatical error, clarify that the same administrative law judge who presides over mediation may not also preside over the contested case hearing if mediation is unsuccessful, and also clarify that a respondent must pay 1/2 of the mediation fees to the board before the date of the mediation. The amendments to Section 157.37 add conforming language for consistency with the amendments to Section 157.30. Again, these amendments were proposed in February as part of the board's quadrennial rule review process, and the Enforcement Committee recommended proposal of these amendments at that time. No comments were received on the amendments as proposed. Staff recommends adopting the amendments as published.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
I move that the staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit for adoption amendments to 22 TAC 157.30, Alternative Dispute Resolution, 157.32, Negotiated Settlement, 157.33, Mediation, and 157.37, Agreements, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. You're doing great. Keep it up. We are to now the emergency rules, and so agenda item number 19 is discussion and possible action to adopt emergency rule amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 153 relating to the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Act.
Madam Chair and board members, as you heard earlier in the meeting, the Appraiser Qualifications Board adopted changes to the criteria required to obtain a license. The emergency rules before you in this agenda item would implement those changes on an emergency basis so that the effective date in Texas could coincide with the AQB's effective date of May 1st, 2018. The amendments before you related to those AQB changes are to sections 153.10, 153.15, 153.21, and 153.22. In addition, also before you is a proposed rule on emergency basis to Section 153.17, that would implement reporting changes to the National Registry as required by the AQB and the Appraisal Subcommittee under Title 11 of the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act of 1989, or FAREA, as amended by the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, aka the Dodd-Frank Act, to accurately reflect the status of an appraiser's license when the appraiser requests an extension of time to complete the required continuing education. TALCB discovered the immediate need for all of these reporting changes and rule changes as a result of changes adopted by the AQB and the 2018 Program Compliance Review conducted by the Appraisal Subcommittee. The Enforcement Committee has considered and recommends the adoption of these amendments on an emergency basis with an effective date of May 1st, 2018. Staff recommends that the board adopt these amendments on emergency basis as presented with an effective date of May 1st, 2018.
Mr. Bolton?
Move that the staff is authorized on behalf of the board to submit for emergency adoption amendments to 22 TAC Section 153.10, issuance of certification, license, or training approval, 153.15, experience required for licensing, 153.16, license reinstatement, 153.17, renewal or extension of license, 153.21, appraiser trainees and supervisor appraisals, and 153.22, voluntary appraiser trainee experience reviews, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption with an effective date of May 1st, 2018.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That motion also passes unanimously. I'm happy to report you've just crossed over the midway mark. There's been a lot of work done over the course of the last few months, so we will move to agenda item number 20, discussion and possible action to adopt an emergency new rule, 22 TAC 155.3, work relating to commercial real estate transactions.
Madam Chair and board members, the rule before you is being proposed to be adopted on an emergency basis to implement changes in federal law that raises the threshold under which an appraisal is not required in a commercial real estate transaction. These changes have already taken effect as of April 9th, 2018, upon the date they were published in the Federal Register. Consistent with these changes in federal law, the board would be adopting this rule specifying the criteria under which persons licensed under the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Act, Chapter 1103 Texas Occupations Code, may prepare evaluations in commercial real estate transactions with a transaction value of $500,000 or less without violating the standards of conduct required for licensure. The Executive Committee considered these proposed amendments and recommends adoption of this rule on an emergency basis with an effective date of May 1st, 2018. Staff is recommending adopting this new rule on an emergency basis as presented with an effective date of May 1st, 2018.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Bolton?
I don't know if I have a question or a comment here, but I think that this is something that is probably pretty pertinent to at least those that are stakeholders in the appraisal industry. I don't know what the right way procedurally here is, but I think it would be important to have the stakeholders weigh in on this particular item before we adopt it as a rule. And so my recommendation is that we decline this motion and allow for it to go through the normal rulemaking process. And anyway, I guess that's my comment, is that I would encourage that we get stakeholders to weigh in on this issue.
Why don't you make that into the form of a motion, and we'll move to discussion.
Okay. I move that the board decline adoption of the emergency rule. Help me out here, Kristen. Am I getting there?
Yes, you're there.
Okay.
Okay.
That's fine.
That's probably enough. Can I get a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Bolton to deny the adoption on an emergency basis, and a second by Mr. Jeffries. So let's move into discussion. Kristen, can you give us some guidance? It seems to me that what he's asking for is an adoption based on a normal rulemaking process rather than an emergency basis. So what is the risk or downfall for doing such?
Well, the only risk or downfall, if there is a downfall at all, is one of timing. Essentially, these changes have already been adopted and effective under federal law. It is perfectly fine if the board wants to take a more diligent approach in adopting these changes in Texas, and allow stakeholders to comment on the effect of these changes and whether they would support these changes or not. The rule is before you in another agenda item to be proposed through the normal notice and comment rulemaking process. And that process, as the board members are aware, would be publication in the Texas Register, and comments would be allowed to come in from stakeholders, and then the board would consider whether or not to adopt the rule formally at its next meeting after that comment period has expired.
Would you also, as our general counsel, inform the board, what is the life of an emergency rule?
Emergency rules only stay in effect for, I believe it's 180 days, but I don't have the exact 120. It's 120 days. And if there is no action to adopt that rule through the normal rulemaking process, the emergency rule would then go away automatically.
So the two work side by side, the emergency rule providing the answer to the immediate question, which is under what conditions can an appraiser actually do an evaluation today? So it's answered by the emergency rule. And then an opportunity for practitioners to weigh in during the normal proposal period, at which time when and if the rule is adopted as amended or adopted as proposed, the emergency rule, it entirely replaces the emergency rule. Is that correct? Is that description correct?
The emergency rule simply allows the board to implement these changes in federal law in a more timely fashion, and because they've already been adopted and they're already effective under federal law. And if it's the board's desire to make those changes here in Texas, to allow appraisers to do this type of work without running afoul of the licensing requirements that are already in place under state law, then that's the reason you would want to adopt it on an emergency basis. And you would also, in tandem with that emergency adoption, propose the rule through the normal notice and comment process to allow you to get that stakeholder input on the pros and cons of adopting this rule on a permanent basis. So, as the commissioner has explained, the question is whether or not you want appraisers to be able to do this kind of work while the normal rulemaking process is ongoing. And that's a policy decision for the board to make.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Bolton?
I guess my point is that I haven't formed an opinion as to whether this is something that I think we should implement or not, and I would, before we take that up, rather than making that decision now, I would rather that we get some input from the industry and from those that use the industry so we have a better informed decision when we do take it up.
I would agree with that.
Okay. If in fact you adopted this emergency rule, does the language depicted in the rule, the disclaimer, have to be verbatim?
Yes, it would.
Okay. Yeah, I'm too concerned about the communication and potentially adopting an emergency rule, getting public comment, and having it change again. I think it's confusing enough as we progress. But I understand the logic behind the emergency rule-making process, and oftentimes we do inherently adopt them. But in this particular case, I do think there's some education to be had. We do have a motion and a second, and the floor is still open for comment. I know we have a banker here that understands this rule maybe from an operational standpoint
Well, I would
better
just say
than we do.
that we're not creating a new rule, we're raising a threshold. And that's where so I think it's prudent to go along with the motion as far as just have more discussion, I think. But we're not creating a new rule. We're just changing a threshold from the existing threshold of 250 to 500.
And I think that is an important point, and so thank you, Mr. Pena, for reminding us and anyone that may be watching these actions of that. Anybody else have comment before I call for a vote? Okay, the current motion is to decline the adoption of the emergency rule. And we do have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? That motion passes unanimously. We will move to agenda item number 21, which are a number of rules for possible proposal.
Yes, Madam Chair and board members, before you in agenda item 21 are the proposed amendments to Chapter 153 coming forward as a result of the board's quadrennial rule review process, as well as changes adopted by the Appraiser Qualifications Board and those recommended changes from the appraisal subcommittee based on the program compliance review that they have conducted. These proposed amendments include Section 153.1, definitions, Sections 153.8, scope of practice, Section 153.9, applications, Section 153.10, issuance of certification, license, or trainee approval, Section 153.11, examinations, Section 153.13, education required for licensing, Section 153.15, experience required for licensing, Section 153.16, license reinstatement, Section 153.17, renewal or extension of license, Section 153.18, appraiser continuing education, Section 153.20, guidelines for revocation, suspension, denial of license, probationary license, Section 153.21, appraiser trainees and supervisory appraisers, Section 153.22, voluntary appraiser trainee experience reviews, Section 153.24, complaint processing, Section 153.26, identity theft, Section 153.27, license by reciprocity. As you heard earlier, the proposed amendments to Sections 153.10, 153.15, 153.16, 153.21, and 153.22 implement changes to the education and experience requirements criteria for obtaining an appraiser license adopted by the Appraiser Qualifications Board that are effective May 1st of 2018. These are the same changes that you've just adopted on an emergency basis in an earlier agenda item. The proposed amendments to Section 153.17 implement reporting changes to the National Registry. As you heard earlier, these proposed amendments are recommended by the Appraisal Subcommittee following our compliance review. The proposed amendments to Sections 153.1, 153.8, 153.9, 153.11, 153.13, 153.18, 153.20, 153.24, 153.26, and 153.27 are made following a comprehensive rule review for Chapter 153 to better reflect current TALCB procedures and to simplify and clarify where needed. The Enforcement Committee has considered and recommends these proposed amendments be published for public comment in the Texas Register. Staff also recommends proposing the amendments as presented.
Madam Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit amendments to Chapter 22 TAC Sections 153.1, 153.8, 153.9, 153.10, 153.11, 153.12, 153.13, 153.15, 153.16, 153.17, 153.18, 153.20, 153.21, 153.22, 153.24, 153.26, and 153.27 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for proposal.
Thank you for that motion. I was afraid I was going to have to call someone out. We have a motion and a second from Mr. Bolton. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We will move to agenda item number 22. Discussion and possible action to propose a new rule, work relating to commercial real estate transactions. This looks familiar.
Madam Chair and board members, the proposed amendments to this rule would implement the changes in federal law, raising the threshold under which an appraisal is not required in a commercial real estate transaction. As you previously heard, the threshold is being raised from $250,000 to $500,000, and this rule would specify the criteria under which persons licensed under the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Act may prepare evaluations in commercial real estate transactions with values less than $500,000 without violating the standards of conduct required for licensure. The Executive Committee has considered and recommends this rule be published for public comment in the Texas Register. Staff recommends proposing the rule as presented.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jeffries.
given all our prior discussion about this, I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit the new Rule 22 TAC 155.3, work related to commercial real estate transactions, as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for proposal.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Jeffries, second by Mr. Bolton. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We will now move to exciting rule review, agenda item number 23.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. Tony Slagle, Government Affairs with the Appraiser Board. So agenda item 23 is discussion possible action to close review of 22 TAC Chapter 157 relating to practice and procedure. The board has completed the review of Chapter 157 as part of the comprehensive rule review process that the board is required by law to complete every 4 years. With the amendments to Chapter 157 adopted by the board today, the board has completed its review of that chapter, and staff recommends closing the review of Chapter 157.
Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Move that the staff is authorized on behalf of this board to close their review of 22 TAC Chapter 157, rules relating to practice and procedure.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Item number 24.
Okay, agenda item 24 is discussion of possible action to open review of 22 TAC Chapter 159, rules relating to the provisions of the Texas Appraiser Management Company Registration and Regulation Act. This item proposes the opening of the rule review for Chapter 159 as part of the quadrennial rule review process that the board is required to conduct by law to conduct. Staff recommends the notice that Chapter 159 will be open for review and comments be published in the Texas Register. Any proposed amendments to that chapter based on that review will be brought forward to the board at its August meeting. Any amendments proposed by the board would then be published in the Register, providing an opportunity for additional comments at that time.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I will move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit the review of 22 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 159, rules relating to the provisions of the Texas Appraisal Management Company Registration and Regulation Act to the Texas Register for publication and public comment.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That motion also passes unanimously. We will move to agenda item number 25, an update regarding the long-term facilities master plan.
Madam Chair and members, unfortunately, due to the state of development at the Facilities Commission, there's no further advancement to report between the last meeting and this meeting. So I will stay connected with them and stay in conversation. So as soon as they are able to assist us in advancing the plan, I promise you I will give you an update.
Thank you. Any questions of the Commissioner regarding that? Hearing none, we will move to new business, agenda item number 26, discussion and possible action regarding the 2018 Appraisal Subcommittee Preliminary Compliance Review.
Madam Chair and board members, before you today in your materials is a copy of the preliminary compliance review that we received from the Appraisal Subcommittee. You will note at page 239 of your materials that the report indicates two areas of non-compliance. The first area was that the state placed on the National Registry as active the renewal information for 16 appraisers who were granted a continuing education CE waiver. As you heard earlier in your meeting, and as you took action earlier in your meeting to adopt a change to Rule 153.17, these appraisers who request a continuing education extension, it's not in fact a waiver, but it's a person who requests an extension of time to complete their required continuing education, must be noted as inactive on the National Registry, because by requesting an extension, they have not complied with the Appraiser Qualifications Board criteria for licensure to provide appraisal services for federally related transactions. So that proposed rule change that was adopted on an emergency basis and was proposed on a permanent basis through the notice and comment rulemaking process was made to address this area of noncompliance identified by the appraisal subcommittee staff. As you will see on page 238, an area of noncompliance may be changed to a yes if a state completely resolves the concern and the ASC staff has validated that change. A no may also be changed to an area of concern if the state reports that they resolved the concern, however, the ASC staff has not validated that action. So we will report those rule changes and the actions that you have taken today in our response to the appraisal subcommittee, with the hopes that they can then validate those changes and the board may be found in compliance in this area. The second area of non-compliance is also noted on page 239. The state placed on the National Registry as active 3 appraiser credentials that were in an inactive status with the state. This particular area resulted from a processing issue that happened when 3 appraisers who were holding an inactive license applied to renew their license, but through no fault of those appraisers, that application was not processed in a timely fashion. So when it was reported to staff and identified to staff by staff that those renewals needed to be processed, that window for renewing the license had closed. So staff had to process those transactions as a reinstatement, which inadvertently noted them as active on the appraisal registry, on the National Registry. And because their status was in fact inactive, that was inaccurate information. We have since corrected our internal processes, both from an IT perspective and from a licensing perspective, to address this area of concern, and we will report that in our response to the appraisal subcommittee. What staff is requesting is that the board authorize the executive committee to provide final approval of those responses to the preliminary compliance report, because we were unable to provide those responses until after the board meeting today.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jeffries.
I move that the board authorize the executive committee to provide final approval of the TALCB response to the 2018 appraisal subcommittee preliminary compliance review.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Pena, was that you? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'm trying to listen for the voice, but I wasn't sure. Any discussion?
Madam Chair? Just one quick question.
Certainly.
So once that approval is done and you demonstrate to the ASC the changes you made, will that bring us into compliance, or are we reasonably certain of that, or what?
Well, as the ASC explains in their letter on page 238, if staff validates those changes, then that would bring us into compliance. But if the ASC staff does not validate those changes, then it could be still listed as an area of concern.
Okay.
Additional questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Bless you. Agenda item number 27, discussion and possible action to approve the 2019 to 2023 TALCB strategic plan.
Madam Chair and members, under tab 27, you will find the current draft of the strategic plan. It is, I want to give a lot of credit to a couple of our staff members who have worked very hard to make sure. Lots of folks had input into this, but especially Christine Anderson for working all the listening tour items, and then Tony Slagle for coordinating the drafting by various, or input from all the various departments in assembling this to have it ready for your materials this early in the process. This will also be presented to the Commission on May the 7th, and since it is a joint strategic plan for the entire agency, we can't actually approve it until after the Commission has the opportunity to weigh in as well. So I want to I want you to pay particular attention to pages 257, 258, and 259 of your materials. That's 15 through 17 of the report itself. And this is the section that is called redundancies and impediments. The items that are found here, the first item has to do with home inspectors, and so not of concern to the board itself. The second item has to do with the potential for regulation of property tax consultants. That is of concern to the board and the commission, both prior to the time that there was a property tax consultant license. And still today, appraisers and real estate brokers can do property tax consultant work, as well as attorneys and accountants, without getting a property tax consultant license. There is, of course, a separate license available for anyone who is not one of those four categories, does not fall in one of those professional categories, or would like to be dually licensed. And so there's some redundancy there with those licenses being at TDLR for property tax consultants, and two of the other licenses being held within this agency, one by the board and one by the commission. So that's an area that we have noted for a couple of years as a potential for a government efficiency. And so we've also raised that issue with the Sunset Commission for their consideration while we're undergoing sunset review. The third item there has to do with residential service companies, also known as home warranty companies. That's handled on the commission side. The next two the next three actually have repercussions for all, for the agency, including the board and the commission. And that has to do with the potential for a single set of fingerprints to be authorized by the owner or the person whose prints those are, to be used in multiple requests for background check across agencies. And that's something we've raised as a potential efficiency measure. That we also raised that with the Sunset Commission. That was included in our last strategic plan, and we will continue to note it there until official action, I guess, is either taken or declined. The next one also has to do with distance meeting technology. So we have pursued, since the time the first distance meetings were allowed to meet Open Meetings Act requirements, we have pursued the opportunity to implement that as a cost-saving and efficiency measure, not just for this agency, but for others as well. But the language of the current statute requires a level of technological sophistication to accomplish that. In fact, it makes it virtually too expensive to implement. And so we have asked and noted, again, brought this to the attention of the Sunset Commission as well in their review, that perhaps it would be appropriate to change the language of the statute to standard distance meeting technology, or currently commercially available, which seems to work fine in lots of other contexts. And so perhaps it could accommodate the open meeting context as well. The last item on there, with respect to redundancies and impediments, is because of this came to our attention because of Hurricane Harvey, of course, and the accommodations that we made for immediate extension of deadlines. Well, it turns out that we and many other licensing agencies our ability to do that is tied directly to the governor's declaration and authority that's found in the government code, but the governor's proclamation and continued extension of that state of emergency. In other words, we couldn't, on our own, we're not authorized to grant that kind of extension. We don't have the authority to do that. There is an agency, however, that does. It's found in their statute in TDLR, and so we think it would probably be a good thing to mirror that grant of authority if the legislature deems that worthwhile and appropriate for us. And so I'm happy to answer any questions that you have either about these topics or about the next steps with respect to the strategic plan. This is our once every 2 years, 5-year strategic plan. If approved by you today for advancement, it will then go to the commission on May the 7th. And if approved by them, if they modify it at all, then it would need to be reconsidered perhaps by the either the chair or the executive committee of the board. That's the recommendation, I think, as it stands. Happy to answer any questions.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Pena.
I move that the board authorize the executive committee to provide final approval of the agency strategic plan before submission to the legislative budget board.
Thank you. We have
A
motion.
second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously, and your executive committee will be happy to take that up. Agenda item number 28, discussion and possible action regarding the draft budget for 2019.
Madam Chair and members, as you heard earlier, the Budget Committee met to review staff's initial recommendation for the draft budget, and that is found in your materials under the tab. I will have just a few highlights and then answer any questions that you have about the budget itself. First, a word about the process. There is a written budget policy adopted by this body that we have been working on for several years. It's been refined a couple of different times, but it is a policy that guides the construction and deliberation and approval of each year's budget. And it begins after the February meeting. And so during March and April, the staff works on assembling gathering all the information necessary, and then working up the first draft that is then presented to the Budget Committee, as was done today. And then this report is given so that the full board or any individual member of the board may have an opportunity to get their questions answered or to offer input to the budget. Guidance going forward. The staff will again take that information and work on a second draft of the budget, which will then be circulated again to the Budget Committee for their deliberations and the full board prior to the August meeting, at which time there'll be a final presentation and action taken on the budget. So generally happens in two complete drafts. So all of the materials that you have here, the first draft is always based on 6 months of actual expenses for the current fiscal year, as well as 6 months of projected expenses through the end of August. So this is actual through February plus projected through August. And if you look at the materials there in fiscal year 2018 estimated annual expenditures. That's the column I'm referring to, that is actual through February and then projected through the end of August. At the next draft of that budget, that will be actual through May, and then projected through the end of August. So it'll be actual for 9 months. So obviously, as the drafts progress, they get more accurate because they're based more on more actual numbers than projected numbers. So in the area of the budget, proposed budget for FY19, we have comments in the far right column, and I will highlight a few of those. So salaries and wages, it's simply taking the current salaries at their current levels and with the current staffing, so it doesn't include any new staffing, and adding 4% to that, 4% increase. And then for budget 2020, in every one of these presentations, there are 2 full years of actual, 2 fiscal years of actual. The year that we are in, both actual and projected, next year's projected, and then the following year's projected. So occasionally there'll be a note for that as well. That is not a highly refined column. Typically it is next year's projected, simply with a couple of minor changes to that. And so we do project another 3% for 2020, but that's just so you have that. The employee benefits is based on a percentage, is 39.5% of base salaries. And so anytime the salary goes up, that goes up as well. Retiree insurance is exactly what it says. Health insurance is required, is a benefit that is earned by someone who has earned state retirement, and it needs to be borne by the agency from which they retired, from which that individual retired. And because we are an SDSI agency, self-directed and semi-independent, all of the expenses that we generate, we must also bear. They cannot be borne by the general revenue. That's part of the grant of SDSI status. And so we have to pay for health insurance for our retirees. Under professional fees and services, you'll see that's a $6,500 increase, and that is really for a NUBIS customization. NUBIS is our electronic information, our electronic imaging database, where all of our documents that have been imaged are stored and retrieved in that system. Okay, and that in order for us to take the next step on making that more automated, more easily retrievable, and require less custom, or I should say manual classification and storage, and then manual retrieval. Automating much of that requires us to move to the next level, and so there's $6,500. That's really what that is. The office space and rent, I will remind you that the rent and about 2/3 of the way down the page, the statewide cost allocation plan, so SWCAP, SWCAP. Those two, there's a portion of SWCAP that is related to occupancy, and in our lease, those two offset each other. So occupancy-related SWCAP, every dollar that we pay is one less dollar of rent that we pay. And so you always have to look at those two together to determine what the impact is. And just based on last year, the SWCAP has gone up, and so the rent goes down, and now it looks like SWCAP is going to go down a little bit, so rent will probably go up. That's just the nature of that trade-off. Let's see, registration and memberships is slightly higher because we've added some additional training for staff development. We believe that's a very good and wise investment. Contract services, additionally, that $7,000 is not the software and hardware for Nubis. It is the actual documentation. So we have, with the board especially, most of our going forward, we're much better about paperless systems, but we have a large backlog of investigation cases that also need to be scanned and put in. So that's the scanning of those documents and storage is what that difference is there. So total, you'll see it's about $100,000 of budget variance between projected for 19 and actual and projected for 18. 90,000 of that is related to personnel. Okay, that's the 4% plus the benefits and retiree insurance. So the rest of it is only about $10,000, and most of that has to do with Nubis document related. So the others you can see where we have some, we continue to not spend money on paper. And so those areas, paper and postage are going down, and those are, we expect to see that continue. Communication services is the other one that is significantly up, and that is replacing our former access to data about commercial transactions to use for searching for comparables on commercial properties. We used to use LoopNet. LoopNet no longer exists. Now we have to move to CoStar. CoStar costs 4 times as much as LoopNet did, but it's all that's available. It's the most affordable option that is available now that LoopNet doesn't exist. That's the expense side. Any questions on that?
I've got a couple just really quick ones. So based on our service issues that we've discussed earlier today, it appears that, and you've announced no new bodies in salaries and wages. Is overtime built in that number?
There is.
Okay.
Overtime. All of the voluntary services that are being provided even by board staff, allocated board staff, will be borne in by the commission.
Okay. And that's exactly what I was going to ask. What role does TALCB have in the communication side of that? So the TREC will pay that back, if you will?
Under the MOU between the Memorandum of Understanding between the board and the commission, reception and communication services, all of that is borne by 100% by the commission.
Okay. And then in other organizations, at least in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, certainly police and fire have had this as a problem. So when you have retiree insurance, how are we forecasting the potential for there to be a significant bump out there, a few years from now? Do we monitor those people that are eligible for retirement? And
we do, and we include those who are eligible. We do a kind of a percentage on that. We could, we do have a contingency, which we'll talk about in a minute, for those kinds of things, unexpected things that happen. But we just based on a history, not everyone who's eligible obviously will retire next year. Otherwise, we'd have 20% of the agency going into retirement, which would be...
That's what I worry about, right? Some year that we have a big hit, but
Yes.
You've got a contingency plan for that.
We have we do. I mean, this budget is, as you see from almost every year, we try to be very conservative on the revenue side and high on the expense side, and we typically are. And so we project a small positive, and we have had for the past, you can look at the numbers here and see that we're we're on track to have large positives. They've been dwindling a little bit. In other words, everything's getting a little sharper, but we're getting better at not being overly conservative and sharper with on the expense side as well. But we still have a net positive, and that allows us some of that ability to put some of that money aside for just those kinds of contingencies.
Those were my questions. Does the other board members have questions? Hearing none, nice job of organizing the thoughts, and you always do a great job with the budget, and I appreciate that.
So I would just want to say something about the revenues and then the reserves. So the revenues, as I said, we try to be conservative, and you can see that we actually have projected the numbers to go down if you look over the past few years, and actually they have been higher than we projected in every year. And so we're very cognizant of the fact that real estate runs in cycles. And we do not want to be caught up in the, it's going to continue to go up, and so we try to be very conservative so that the day when it does turn, we're in the middle of a budget year, and we don't get caught. You'll also note that for the AMC revenue line item, just a reminder that we began our AMC regulatory registration licensing in 2012, and of our 173, I think 140 or 138 or 40 are in the even numbered year, okay, and then the balance are in the odd numbered year, and so every year we anticipate what it will look like, all the revenue available for a 2-year renewal period. Add those two together, divide them in half, and then either add or subtract them from the fat year and add them to the lean year in terms of a carry forward. And so you'll see a row there. Third row up from the bottom of the page says AMC revenue carry forward. So we are currently in the even numbered year, and so we'll be carrying $284,000 into next year as a projection. You'll see one brand new item there, a row that didn't exist last year. It's called reallocation from prior year's restricted education reserves. Without that number, we would be showing a small negative, about $19,000 negative. That $22,000 is in a pool of funds that is restricted by board policy. It is not dedicated by statute. So all of the monies that have been accumulated by the agency over time that have to do with administrative penalties. Prior to January 1st of 2016, this board, per its policy, said we're going to restrict those funds. Okay, that's on your own initiative. We're restricting those funds within our operating account, saying let's pretend those don't exist. We'll operate as if we don't need them. Okay. From January 1st of 2016 going forward, in our statute, those are legislatively dedicated funds. So they are dedicated to the Educational Development Reserve, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But prior to that time, that reserve was restricted by board policy. So in preparation for this permanent dedication, we had this temporary restriction. We have used some of that money over time for specifically education-related activities, both the as allowed by statute, the appraiser fee study that we do every 2 years with the Real Estate Center, Texas A&M, and the University of Houston. Those expenses can be paid for out of those restricted or also reserved or dedicated funds. So we've used them for their intended purposes. The funds, the net funds that were accumulated prior to January 1 of 2016 are available to be unrestricted at the board's discretion. And so it is the staff's recommendation and was favorably commented upon by the committee today to unrestrict $22,000 of that going forward for next year so that we project an operating a slight positive. Okay? Any questions about the revenue side? All right, then if you'll flip to the next page, I am going to focus my explanation in the middle section of the page. The top is just these are all of our cash balances. Those are all the funds that we have in various accounts. But if you start with where the words are highlighted in tan there, I will walk through that. So projected cash balance at the end of August is $1.75 million. Okay, 427,000 of that, almost 428, is proposed to be held in reserve for current operations and contingencies under this board's written budget policies and reserve policies. Not less than 3 months and not more than 4 months of actual operating expenses should be held in an operational reserve. That's what that represents. Okay, that's what the proposal is. 428,000. You'll see the reallocation from the education reserve to cover FY19 shortfall in revenues is 22,000. That would come from Fund 3056. That is our operating account. So that is where those funds have been restricted. So that currently there's $115,000 that's in that restricted fund, reserved for educational development, and that's all the money prior to January 1 of 2016. That remains. We have about $30,000 that we anticipate will be expended of those funds in this year, leaving a balance at the end of FY18 on August 31st of $85,000. And if $22,000 of that is reallocated, that'll still leave us $63,000. That's the balance in that restricted portion of our operating account. Fund 3193 is the dedicated portion. That is funds that were accumulated after January 1 of 2016. And so there's 2 years worth there, as you can see. So that's $65,268 in dedicated funds. So that still leaves us clearly sufficient reserves for paying for education related and the fee studies as well. We still have sufficient funds to cover those related expenses. There is one more reserve, and that is the long-term facilities master plan. So as we have moved forward with the goal of no longer paying rent at some point, if we are able to afford and are given the opportunity to construct a building on leased land, working with the Facilities Commission, then we have to have the cash to do that. And so you have to date reserved over $1 million towards that. And based on this year's net activity, we believe we'll be able to recommend that you add another $180,000 to that reserve. Okay? Any questions? Either about the line items or the process. Happy to. So there's not any particular action that is needed at this. I described the process as it will continue going forward, and so you'll see this again, and the numbers will be sharper. But at any time that anyone has any questions about how the process works or any input into a recommendation for something, I know that the Budget Committee, Finance Committee would be happy to entertain that and make sure that the staff considers it. And I'll make that commitment to you as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's move to agenda item number 29, discussion and possible action regarding the 2-year renewal of agency contract with Pearson VUE for the license examination, development, and administration.
Madam Chair and board members, Pearson VUE is the contracted examination provider for both the board and the Texas Real Estate Commission. Pursuant to the terms of the current contract, the board and TREC may renew the contract for one additional 2-year term from September 1st of 2018 through August 31st of 2020. Overall, staff is satisfied with Pearson VUE's performance under this contract, and we see no reason at this time to go through the expense of an RFP to find another examination provider. There is one item, however, where staff recommends an amendment to the contract. Pearson VUE currently uses what is called palm vein technology, or PVT, which scans an exam candidate's palm and generates a unique numeric code that is then stored to help Pearson VUE validate the identity of each candidate on each subsequent entry after a break, during the examination, or at a subsequent examination. This technology involves what is known as a biometric identifier, similar to a fingerprint or a retina scan. The Texas legislature adopted Section 503.001 of the Business and Commerce Code that took effect on September 1st of 2017 to address the capture and use of biometric identifiers in Texas. The statute requires notice, which Pearson VUE gives to the candidates in the candidate handbook. The statute also requires consent by the candidate. Under Pearson VUE's current practice, if a candidate does not consent to the PVT, the candidate cannot sit for the examination. The board recently received a complaint about Pearson VUE's use of PVT, causing staff to look into this issue further. Pearson VUE has stated that it will work with both the commission and the board to implement each agency's decision regarding the use of PVT. Staff is recommending that the board approve the renewal of the contract with Pearson VUE with an amendment to eliminate the use of PVT for board exam candidates and continue to rely on the use of a photo identification and signature to verify identity.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Bolton.
move that the board approve the 2-year renewal of agency contract with Pearson VUE for license examination, development, and administration with an amendment to eliminate the use of PVT for TALCB exam candidates and continue to rely on the use of a photo and signature for identity verification.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We will move to agenda item number 30, discussion and possible action regarding recommendations from the Executive Committee related to education providers offering unapproved courses.
Madam Chair and board members, in your materials behind tab 30 at page 313 is a letter that was sent from the Appraisal Foundation to James Park, the Executive Director of the Appraisal Subcommittee, regarding a course that was improperly offered via synchronous distance education and was not approved by the foundation to be offered in that methodology. It was only approved to be offered via classroom education only. The education provider, Champion School of Real Estate, informed the foundation that it was approved as a live broadcast course in several states, including Texas. The foundation in the letter explains that it has no regulatory authority over education providers in violation of the criteria, and the only action that the foundation can take against an education provider is if they are in violation of CAP policies or an executed license agreement with the foundation. After this letter was sent to the Appraisal Subcommittee contacted the board staff and requested that staff look into this matter further and determine any students who may have taken this inappropriate course and require them to take a substitute course that would be a valid course. As the board, as some of you know, the Education Committee has been looking into adopting rules to regulate education providers for the board. Specifically, we began the process of looking at the approval of continuing education courses and providers because that was the expressed need from those who wanted to offer continuing education courses. The board currently has no rules regarding education providers, approval of those providers or approval of those courses. The board relies solely on the approval of education providers and courses from other entities such as the Appraisal Foundation or another state regulatory agency. If one of those entities has approved a course and a provider, then Texas will automatically accept that provider and those approved courses. So the Executive Committee took up this issue in discussion at their recent meeting and is recommending that the board direct the Education Committee to develop proposed rules for education providers and courses for consideration by the board at a future meeting. The purpose of this is to give the board authority to address the type of situation expressed in the letter from the Appraisal Foundation, because currently the board has no independent authority to take action regarding this. We can simply contact the education provider in the hopes that the education provider will do the right thing and offer any students affected by this course in Texas a substitute course at no fee to the student. But we have no authority to actually implement that request without specific rules that this board would consider and adopt.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jeffries.
I move that the Education Committee develop proposed rules for education providers and courses for consideration by the board at a future meeting.
Second.
We have, I know, that is Mr. Jeffries. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That motion passes unanimously. We will move to number 31, discussion regarding performance review and salary of the TALCB Commissioner. So, Commissioner, we did meet in executive session and were able to review generally the survey results. I'm happy to report you get good marks, and we appreciate your hard work. There are a couple of comments as they relate to the evaluation that we will address, I'm sure, after having met with Trek, and in the past, we've handled that with a couple of the chairs sitting down with the commissioner. But by and large, good job. The board's welcome to comment as it relates to the evaluation or your individual perspectives. We will certainly await Trek's actual action as we move forward. Anyone else have comment?
Yes, I just wanted to commend you for tackling head-on and not trying to hide behind any excuses, and tackling the problem with our services, and sending the apology out to the public and our stakeholders, and letting them know that you are committed and to do what it needs to be done to provide better services. And I thank you for that.
Any other comments? Well, we look forward to giving you more detailed explanation after Trek has had the opportunity to go through that with you, and Avis and I have had a chance to sit down with you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. It continues to be a very high privilege to be able to serve this board, so thank you.
Yes, sir. We have addressed agenda items 32 and 33 previously, so we will move to agenda item 34, discussion and possible action to approve changes to TALCB forms.
Gwen Jackson, Director of Education and Licensing Services. Agenda item number 34, discussion and possible action to approve changes to the following forms: the application for approval as an appraiser trainee, the application for licensed residential appraiser, the application for certified residential appraiser, as well as the application for certified general appraiser. These forms have been revised to align them with changes to the education requirements for obtaining an appraiser license adopted by the Appraiser Qualifications Board effective May 1, 2018.
So generally, it appears that the criteria previously was designated with specifics, and we've removed that now, and it just simply says that the new forms are going to simply say, is education to meet the current education requirements being submitted at this time, and it's going to be a yes or no answer, and then below there is an instruction to submit the transcripts.
Yes, however, as you'll note in the form itself, there are areas there that show you what has changed.
I'm just curious about efficiencies. So in the past, it kind of gave the person submitting a little checklist, and that looks like that's going to be gone. Is anybody else concerned about that, or is that? I understand the efficiency of changing it, so we don't have to change the form again someday.
Madam Chair and board members, the changes have been announced on the website, and then that checklist is also included on the board's website for each license category. So when you're applying for a license, you will have that checklist, that list of courses that you have to complete as part of your application.
And it's easy to find on the website, correct? Or is going to be?
Yes.
So, just two comments about that. One is, yes, we'll highlight it and ensure that it in fact is easy to find. The other thing that would that bears on this is that there are so many new options, right, that to include all the paths for all the combinations of options that are available to meet the minimum criteria we'd add another page to the form.
Right. Again, that's really more public service announcement that we need to be looking to the website for the checklist, if you will. So the item number 34 is up for action and approval.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Bolton.
Move that the board approve the changes to the TALCB forms as presented with an effective date of May 1st, 2018.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Gosh, we're getting to other business. It looks like the end's in sight. Agenda item number 35, the request for potential future meeting agenda items. Are there items that this board would like to address on a future agenda?
Madam Chair?
Ms.
Not to beat a dead horse, but I appreciate the staff's and the commissioner's explanation on the hold times that were reported in the article and the email that was sent out, and just keep us apprised as how the upgrades are coming.
We certainly will.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any additional items the board would like to bring forward for future agenda items? Okay. Let's move to number 36, possible future meeting dates.
So if you look at page 367, of course, where the calendar is, you will see that the next board meeting is currently was proposed at the last meeting for Friday, August the 17th. And if that's still good with everyone, we'll lock that in and then look at November. By default, our November meeting should be on the 16th of November, and I recommend that we keep it there for the following reasons. The public hearing with respect to the sunset review will either be on the 14th or the 15th of November for this agency. So if you're able to, and we will try, of course, to get it on the 15th if possible, so that everyone could come in if you wanted to be a part of that, and then just stay over for the meeting the next day.
Does the 16th work for the board?
Madam Chair, do we have any concerns about Mr. Black and his availability? Because it's usually...
Since it's a Friday meeting, that's his preference. He shouldn't.
It's usually a sensitive topic.
Okay. Anyone else have concerns? We will presume then that date will work, Commissioner, if you will go ahead and block the 16th of November and potentially the 15th as well. Is there any?
In conjunction with that, because it is both in preparation for the legislative session and sunset, of course, we'd like to keep the opportunity for a legislative workshop with the board members as well, depending on the timing of it will only be a couple of hours, if you will, or that our agency would be considered at that public hearing, maybe 3 or 4 at the most, but that would still give us some time to do a workshop or some training. Okay.
Thank you. Is there any other business before this board? Hearing none, the time is 2:23, and we will consider ourselves adjourned. Thank you for hard work. This was lots of heavy lifting.